welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. This is episode 34. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea.
This is a program about the craft of knitting and the people who practice that craft, and we have another great show prepared for you today. Veronik Avery is an exceptionally talented Montreal-based designer and has been a part of the design team of Brooklyn Tweed since 2012. Veronika will be sharing her designing tips and talking to us about her work in an interview at the end of this episode.
Yes, and our guest from Knitters of the World in Sweden is going to show us some super cute, cuddly knitted toys. We're going to meet the lovely Emily Greene, whose pattern is featuring in new releases. Madeline and I have got a short sewing segment prepared for you. Andrew is brioching. I have very slowly and carefully picked up my knitting needles again, and we're going to take you to a really famous German wine growing region for extreme knitting. So hold on to your hats. It's a rocky road. We're going to start with under construction, brioching with Andrew.
So we are a little bit late to the brioche knitting party. Last weekend, Andrea taught herself the basic brioche stitches so that she could teach me the basic brioche stitches so that I could continue with her hat, which is coming along now. I started off under instructions from Andrea. This is another spontaneous design from Andrea. It's not terribly sophisticated so far. I started off with 6 centimetres of a plain rib, just normal knitting rib. Nice
one
and
by
long.
one.
Yeah, 1 by 1 rib so that Andrea can fold up the brim of the hat. That's how she wants it.
Yeah.
It's going to be a nice snuggly hat here. And then after that, it's just a plain one colour brioche knit. So that means I'm alternating 1 row of burping and 1 row of barking. It is turning out to be reasonably easy. The challenge that I have, and it happens just about every row, is figuring out how to handle this corner here, all right? So when I go around, I'm doing magic loop. I'm doing it all in the round, of course. Magic loop, I find it really confusing as to what I should do at each end, okay? And the main thing is, does the yarn go forward or back or underneath? And I know Andrea's trying to teach me to look at what I've done and to try to continue doing the same sort of thing, but I do find it hard to recognise these things.
Yeah, it's all about learning to read your knitting.
Reading your knitting,
Yeah.
yes. That's still a skill that's coming. I'm hoping something magic will happen there. I'm not sure.
It's looking really good.
It does look good. What the next challenge that's coming up, I have to continue this a little bit, and that's fine. The next challenge that is coming up is so this doesn't just be a loop and a sort of tube, and it does actually turn into a hat with a closed top on the top of your head. Andrea needs to learn to decrease so that I can learn to decrease in brioche. Right? So we're living dangerously.
I'll give myself a quick lesson, then I'll teach him.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see
and then I'll
what
figure
comes
out how to do it, actually. I know I've got the right amount of stitches on, so I'm pretty sure we'll figure it out.
Yeah, so that's my latest skill. I'm pretty proud.
Yeah, and he's
myself
doing a really
again.
good job. Yeah. Okay, so I know many of you are already brioching, and brioching is very much in vogue at the moment, and there's probably quite a lot of people in the audience who are brioching in 2 colours, but I just wanted to very quickly give a description of the basic brioche stitch in 1 colour brioche knitting for those of you who haven't yet tried it. So I think it's pretty fair to say that Nancy Marchant is the world authority on brioche knitting. The brioche stitch has been around for a really long time. It's known by different names throughout Europe, but she was the first one to standardise the abbreviation and terminology for brioche stitch, and so that knitters all around the world could share the same patterns and understand the abbreviations. And she came up with the terms barking and burping, which I think are super fun.
Yeah.
So a bark stitch is simply a knit stitch. So you knit a stitch and together with a yarn over or a wrap that's on it. So you knit them both together. And so that's called a bark, and the abbreviation is BRK. And the purl version of that is called a burp. And that is you purl a stitch together with its yarn over or wrap. And you pull them both together as 1 stitch, and that's burping or a burp stitch.
Yep.
So what you're doing is you might, if you have a look at it, just the plain one colour, it looks like, it kind of looks like a 1x1 rib. So you've got columns of knit stitches and columns of what looks like a purl stitch. So what you're doing is on one row, you're working one stitch and you're going to be slipping and wrapping the alternate stitch. So it's just say I've knitted a stitch, I then put my yarn forward to the front of the work, I slip the next stitch purlwise, and then I give it a yarn over. So I wrap the top of it over and then I work the next stitch. So, and that slipping and wrapping is creating the bark stitches or the burp stitches that you'll work in the next row. So to do one complete row of brioche knitting, you have to, in essence, go around twice. Yeah. So that's a basic definition. I'm going to put a couple of pictures here of Andrew's knitting, and in one of them you'll see that over what looks like every second column, which is a knit stitch, they'll have a little wrap over the top of it. And then the other picture, you'll see every what looks like a purl stitch has a little wrap over. So when you come across that row, you'll be burping when you purl those stitches together with their wrap stitch, or barking when you knit the knit stitches with their wrap stitch.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not too confusing for you. There's heaps of tutorials out there. It is quite easy once you get your mind around the barking and the burping. And the thing is, what it does is, because it takes two rows to create one row of knitting, it does make it harder to count your rows and count your stitches and to measure gauge. And Nancy says it's a good idea to knit brioche at a much tighter gauge than what you would normally knit. So this is
for the given yarn.
Yeah. So this is Aran weight. And I'm using a 4mm needle, or Andrew's using a 4mm needle for that. And it just means that it's not going to stretch out of shape or get too sloppy. And it's quite a dense fabric, but it's still squishy and good.
It's a nice material.
Yeah, and the other thing she says, the number one rule for brioching is don't make a mistake.
That's good.
Which is it's not promising encouragement, but it's a joke. What it means is that it's really difficult. Well, it's much more difficult to unpick and fix up a mistake in the brioche knitting than it is in normal rib or knitting. So that's why it's a good idea to use lifelines, which Andrew's been using.
Yes. Dental floss lifelines.
So I showed you how to do this in a few episodes ago, but you get some dental floss, and if you're using needles like this, circular ones with a little hole in it to tighten up the screw, you can thread your dental floss through that and then just knit normally, and the needle will carry the dental floss around and set it up for you.
Otherwise you would just knit your row and then you would go through with a darning needle or something, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but this is a pretty easy way of doing it. Yeah, but he's doing such a good job. It creates a reversible fabric. Ours isn't quite reversible, I've just noticed. Because
got the quality control going on here.
Because we've got two little bloops.
The little features.
Two little mistakes here. So
unique.
You can't see it on this side at all. So we will just be using the outside.
Yeah. I have no idea how that happened.
No.
I think you might have been taking over for a bit there.
Right.
Because I've been very careful.
But maybe. I would not deny that.
Yeah.
I did do a very rushed teach myself 5 minutes before showing Andrew.
Yep. But it's fun. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
To celebrate our entry into the world of brioche knitting, we are launching the Fruity Brioche Cowl starting from the 1st of August. If you're a beginner to brioche knitting, a new starter like myself, you could do a simple hat or a scarf, something small. If you're already experienced in brioche knitting, you might like to try something a little more ambitious, like one of the exquisitely beautiful leafy work designs from Nancy Marchand.
Yeah.
Or there's also the Ronan cardigan, oversized cardigan from Andrea Mowry.
Yeah, which she talked about in the last episode. Yeah. And I just want to quickly mention the Fruity You and Me Carl. That's coming to a close at the end of August. That was a carl where you had to knit partner projects. So you had to knit 2 projects, one for yourself and one for a loved one, and somehow those projects had to be connected. If you haven't seen that thread, go over and have a look at the projects and the garments that have been done. There's some really lovely stories there of how people have connected to projects for themselves and their loved one.
Some of them are very cute.
Very, very cute and very lovely and very thoughtful. So I've loved this cowl. So thank you for everybody who has been joining in that, and keep going with your projects. We're going to donate one of the prizes, and that will be an ebook by Tin Can Knits, and that is Heart on My Sleeve, Knit with Care. And it's a great ebook. It's got 8 projects in it from 9 different indie designers, and it's a charity project which is going to support the finances go to support the Against Malaria Foundation, which I think is a brilliant idea.
That sounds like a really nice project from Tin Can Knits, so well done.
Yeah. And why I think this is a good prize for the cowl is because there is good information there, and I'm hoping about adapting and changing patterns, and I'm hoping that it's going to encourage you to knit further partner garments and taking patterns and adapting them so that it's good for you and somebody you love. Yeah.
I live in Stockholm, Sweden, and I make toys. I've been taught how to knit when I was a very small child by my mother and by my grandmother, and I haven't stopped knitting ever since. And when my first nephew was born, I wanted to make him a toy, because I myself got a toy when I was born as well from my aunt. I was looking for patterns at that time, and the only thing I could find were made in very small pieces that you had to stitch together at the end. And I don't really like stitching, and I'm really not good at sewing at all, so I decided to make my own toy. And this is it. This is the first toy I ever designed. It's very easy to make because it's knit in the round, the whole body in one piece from the bottom to the top, and then you just have to pick up the stitches to attach the limbs. And that's it. It's very easy to make. And I liked it so much that I just kept designing toys because I thought there weren't enough cuties out there. So I'm going to introduce you some of my cuties a bit later on. Now, I myself am a mother of 2 beautiful kids. The latest one was born a month ago, and there's inspiration in them everywhere. Whatever they look at, all the books, all the pictures, even their clothes, they're kind of an inspiration for me. So, I guess there are going to be a lot of more toys coming around. I like patterns that you can use any kind of yarn with. I don't really like patterns that you have to stick to one specific yarn. So, and also I like scrap yarns a lot. I keep all my scraps, like the tiny bits of pieces, to make something unique and beautiful with it. I really like making small toys, like the traveling turtle, for example, because it's a very fun and very small knit. You can use the smallest scraps of pieces of yarn that you can find anywhere, and also you can take it wherever you go. I do this, and I take pictures with this one wherever I go. I really like traveling. I'm usually behind the camera. So you can find lots of pictures of this travel turtle on my blog as well. This toucan is called Tim, and I made him because my son had a onesie that had this toucan on it with the exact same colors, and I just had to make a toy to go with it. The construction is very easy as well, so you just knit the body and the round, you pick up the stitches for the extremities, and you knit them on immediately. And you can even add some crinkle papers for the wings, which makes them crackle. It's a lot of fun for smaller kids as well. It has some tail feathers, and it's just the perfect size for the kid to just bite into the beak or to squish and take him into his bed with him. When you have kids, there's inspiration everywhere. I guess you recognize this one. I really like to read stories for my kids as well, and I was looking for a caterpillar pattern, but all the caterpillar patterns that I could find that were straight, and none had this bendy look. So I had to, of course, to design my own caterpillar. This one is also made in one piece, like the whole body is knit in one piece, and you just change the colors as you go along. It's also knit in the round, and then you just pick up the stitches for the small extremities as you go along. The fun thing about this is that you can use any kind of yarn and any kind of color choice, and I really like to play around with colors, and they all kind of turn out very lovely. And I can't really stop making those because I can combine all the colors that I like. This can be as big or as small as you want. So you just use a fingering yarn for a smaller caterpillar, or some bulky for a huge caterpillar that you can use as a pillow, for example. The best thing about yarn is that you always have something left over. And I really like those leftover projects a lot because they always make something very, very unique. And because I like toys and I also like clothes, I kind of like to combine them too. Who can resist this one? I mean, seriously, you can make it from scrap yarn, you can wear it, and it's a toy, and it eats you up. It's perfect. And you can make it in any kind of size, with any kind of yarn, with any kind of needle, and you just have something unique with all the scrap yarns that you've always been hoarding for so long, and you never found any project to go with it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so a slip and wrap and a burp. Yeah?
Okay.
Slip and wrap.
Yeah, I know once you
and
get
a
going.
burp. Let me just check that I've got it right.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, good.
Good.
Okay. Thank you, Doreen. That was so good. She is a wonderful mum.
What a mum.
I
Mum
think
points there.
Yeah, I think it has to be every child's dream to have their mother make their favourite character out of their favourite picture book into a toy, and she's done that so well. That Very Hungry Caterpillar was beautiful.
The Very Hungry Caterpillar is so cool, and I was thinking if Doreen is taking requests, hi Doreen, my suggestion was Where the Wild Things Are by Sendak. I can't remember his first name, but it's such a stunning book, and it's got Max who goes off to where the wild things are.
Yeah, you could make make a pattern for Max or one of the wild things.
One of the wild things. The wild things are fun.
Yeah, but do both.
So, yeah.
That is a fantastic book. I loved that book as a kid. Madeline loved it, so it's a really long time classic. It was probably written in the late 60s, early 70s. I can remember it in Australia being read out on Play School, if any other people remember Play School.
For the Australians out there, yes.
I totally love that book. That's a brilliant book. If you don't know it, go and check it out. It's one of the all-time kids' classics. So it'd be super cool to see Max or one of the wild things being knitted. Yeah.
A bit of scrap yarn into that.
Yeah. So thanks, Doreen. It was so lovely to have you on our show. So thanks for your contribution. Now I'm going to show you my latest project, which is out of the Romi Hill New Lace Knitting Book, and it's the project that's on the front cover. That's the Manzanita Tea. And it's a very simple project with a little bit of lace, and I've picked it for a good reason. I think it's a stunning design, but I've been playing around with different knitting styles, and normally a lot of the things that I knit are quite complicated stitch patterns, so twisted stitches and cabling without cable needles and lace and all the rest of it, and it's hard to try out a new knitting style doing those patterns. It's much easier to try out a knitting style doing stockingette, and this is what this pattern is going to give me. So you start at the top with a provisional cast on. There it is there. You've got a small section of lace, which I've finished now, so that's my lace down here. You knit a little bit further, divide for the arms, and knit down the body, all in stockingette, and then the sleeves in stockingette. Then you pick up around the top of the lace and knit the sort of the cuff of the neckline. So I'm now going to be able to experiment with different styles of knitting in the body, in the round, which I'm going to do. So we had a live knit and chat session session with live event with our Shetland patrons the other week, and one of our patrons was telling me that she alternates between Portuguese, continental and English style knittings all in the same project, and that has really helped her manage her arthritis, and I thought that was very inspiring. So the very next day I taught myself to purl and knit in Portuguese, which was kind of fun. So thank you, Kathy. That was really good hearing that from you.
Yep.
Yeah, and she does it all in one project, which is interesting. And so the obvious question you're all shouting at me is, won't that change my gauge on using this very luxurious yarn? Well, the short answer is, if it does, I will rip it out and redo it. But I will just constantly be checking to see that it doesn't do that, or I'll go a little bit slower. But I did want to say that how I learnt to knit and how I taught Andrew to knit, and Madeline, and when you a beginner knitter, I think it's a good idea to set up that you're working at a good gauge right from the beginning, is you can really see how your gauge is by sliding your worked stitches on the right-hand needle on and off from the cable up here, and you can actually get a really fine feeling of how tight or loose the stitches are.
Yeah, just on the needle.
Just on the needle, just by doing this. You might think, oh, you can't really feel the difference, but you can actually feel quite a lot of subtleties there. And then you can also pull your stitches down and see how much is it hanging down from the needle. Mine doesn't hang down much at all, maybe a millimetre. And the whole idea is that you don't want it to catch. It shouldn't be catching at all. It should move, but it shouldn't sort of fall off very easily. And that's usually a pretty good gauge for you, because you don't ever want to be stretching your yarn around a needle either. And you don't want to be knitting too loosely, otherwise you'll always have to go down 3 or 4 sizes in the needle to get the gauge recommended on a pattern, and that's way harder for you. It's better if you can teach yourself to just knit a little bit tighter if you are a loose knitter. So that's something that I will constantly do. I'll knit a bit of Portuguese, have a slide.
Yeah.
Knit a bit of continental, have a slide. So I wanted to say quickly what yarn I'm using. It's from the Fibre Co. It is Road to China Light. It's a very luxurious yarn. It is 65% baby alpaca. I think it's about 10% silk, 15% silk, 10% cashmere and 10% camel. So it's super luxurious. I hope it doesn't mean that it's high maintenance. I did want to use it because it is a recommended yarn for this project, and I've never used Fibre Company before. And it is beautiful colours. Like, you won't see this on the screen, but it is very subtly 2 colours, more of a blue and more of a green put together, and that gives it that aqua. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I'll let you know how I go with my different styles.
Yep. A couple of weeks ago, we had a family outing to Rüdesheim, which is on the Rhine River here in Germany. Rüdesheim's a very popular tourist destination. It's also a wine-growing region.
Yeah.
It's full of touristy shops and things to do and see. There is a cable car which goes from the centre of town up to the top of the hill. You get a great view of the Rhine. You can also see the abbey, which is very famous, founded by Hildegard von Bingen in 1165.
Yeah, and I have to say very quickly a little bit about Hildegard, because she was an exceptional woman. She was a true polymath. So she had expertise in many, many subjects. So she was a writer, she was a philosopher, she was a composer. I've sung some of her compositions. She was a playwright, she was a Christian mystic, a visionary. Did I say an artist? She was a well-known and respected artist. She wrote a lot on herbology, and she's considered to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. So she was one amazing woman. She was also a political advisor and confidant to quite a lot of the major powers at that time. And she was very well known for having tantrums by going off and fasting when she didn't get her own way. She usually did get her own way after
In the end.
after a few days fast.
It sounds like she might have been an inspiration for Gandhi.
Yes. Yeah. So she's an exceptional woman. If you like history, or you've got to go read about Hildegard von Bingen. And Bingen is the little village that's right across the Rhine from Rudesheim, and that's where there's also a monastery for her. But she founded this abbey that you're going to see in this footage. It's just 3 minutes footage. I think it's a really great little trip. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Extreme knitting. And it's accompanied by music that you're all going to recognise from the opera La Traviata. So enjoy it, and we'll see you very soon.
Greene, and today I'm going to share with you a little more about one of my recent designs, the Diagrid shawl. My inspiration for this design was really a desire to create a modern, minimal, geometric take on a classic lace shawl. Diagrid is a triangular shawl. It's worked from the top down and is then finished with a knit-on eyelet edging, which you can see all the way around the perimeter there. The top-down construction really led to the kind of heart of this design. What that means is that you start the shawl with a very, very small number of stitches cast on here at the center of the long edge of the triangle and then increase out radially. And that means that the lace motifs of the shawl meet along these diagonal increase lines in these beautifully mitered corners, which is really one of my favorite things about this design. This pattern is written for lace weight yarns. This sample is knit in a recycled wool lace weight that I actually unraveled from a sweater from the thrift store. But in terms of readily accessible lace weight yarns, I would recommend Brooklyn Tweed's new lace weight yarn veil would be an excellent choice, or Yarn on the House's heavy lace weight base called Mother. Both of those are Rambouillet wool yarns. They're worsted spun and have really excellent stitch definition and a beautiful range of colors. Of course, one of the really fun things about shawls in general is that they're not super gauge dependent, so you can easily experiment with knitting this in a heavier weight yarn. You could knit it in a fingering weight yarn or even a DK weight yarn and get a really cozy, oversized winter shawl, or you could go even bigger. This is a little test I've been playing around with of knitting this lace in an Aran weight, and you can see that at this heavier gauge, you get a really wonderful sort of chunky, robust lace pattern, really, really graphic. So have fun with it, experiment, do a little swatch, see if you like the fabric, but it can take a lot of different yarns. The name Diagrid is actually a term from architecture, which is my day job. It's a portmanteau of the words diagonal and grid, and it describes an extremely efficient structural system that is composed of a mesh of diagonal columns supporting a building from the exterior, allowing for a completely column-free space in the interior. This is a system that's been used by a ton of iconic works of architecture, has been used by Rem Koolhaas at his Seattle Public Library and CCTV headquarters in Beijing, as well as by Norman Foster at the Hearst Tower here in New York City. And of course, the Gherkin in London is one of the best known examples of the Diagrid system. So when I was working the initial swatches for this design, the diagonal lines of the lace pattern, and I would say the sort of graphic efficiency of this motif really reminded me of that system, and I loved the idea of giving this pattern a name that was a nice little nod to my architectural background. Anyway, thanks so much, Andrea and Andrew, for having me here on the podcast and for letting me share a little bit more about Diagrid.
Thank you, Emily. That's a really beautiful shawl. And like Emily said, you could use a lot of different yarn weights to knit that shawl. So I think it's a really good stash buster.
Yeah. I love the design. I love the architectural reference there too. We are now in episode 34. Over the past time, we have produced 25 fantastic interviews with some of the biggest names in the knitting world. We've had around 30 guests on Knitters of the World, our segment featuring inspirational amateur knitters. And Andrea has also presented many very in-depth and helpful tutorials on knitting technique.
And we totally love preparing and bringing you this content. And every single episode, we put in our very best effort. Mm-hmm. There's quite often a segment is only going to be 5 minutes long, but we have put in at least 5 to 6 hours in planning, organising, filming and editing just that 5 minutes. And we don't try to make that 5 minutes a little bit longer to get more value out of the effort we've put in. We actually do the opposite. We try to make it as short as possible so that every single minute of your viewing is really worthwhile. And this makes it a much higher level of effort to produce a show. And it's a full-time job for me now, and Andrew actually helps me do stuff on top of that. And we're very independent. We don't receive financial support from advertising or other sponsorships. We rely on our viewers for financial support so that we can keep going. You can become a patron for around the cost of a couple of coffees per month. So if you are a regular viewer and you really enjoy and look forward to our show, please help us to continue by becoming a patron. Thank you.
So, dolls, do I have to go now?
Yes, you do.
Oh.
Madeline is going to join me very quickly, a short sewing segment, and then we're up to our interview, which is going to be great. Bye.
Bye.
So Madeline's joining us again, and you might have noticed that I'm wearing something different. I've just got changed because this week, or the last couple of weeks, I've been sewing jersey tops. So we've got 2 new tops here, and I've been using the pattern Tilly and the Buttons Agnes jersey top, and it's a really easy to sew, easy explained stretch top that you can wear, and it comes with a whole lot of different variations. So you can have long sleeves or short sleeves, you can have a plain sleeve cap or
puffed sleeves, the bigger the better.
Yeah, like Anne of Green Gables. And that's really interesting because all that is a very long sleeve cap that has been gathered together with a piece of elastic so that you bring it back down to its normal height, and then sewn in around here. But it's very effective, and I think it looks great. And she's also got instructions to make this section ruched here and to make the neck into a sweetheart neckline if you want to. I can see that this pattern is going to be used a lot because you can always have stretched tops as a basic. Both of them are for Madeline, but I just thought it's much better for you to see them modelled on the two of us. So here they are. I think this material is really groovy. It's got Marilyn Monroe and
Elvis Presley over there.
Yeah.
And some comics.
Yeah.
It's very, very busy and colourful.
Yeah, very 60s. Yeah. And this is kind of a fun dotted one.
Yeah, feel a bit like a princess in it, which is unusual for me, but I do like it very much.
What's your favourite, the puffed or the straight sleeves?
It depends on the kind of top. I don't think I'd want to wear too many puffed sleeves, but on the occasion, I think it looks really good.
Yeah. And always when you sew a project, you have material left over, and I don't like throwing it out, and I also don't like keeping it. So my niece Simba has now got 2 extra garments. I have sewn her a little T-shirt with the leftovers of the top that I'm wearing. It's just a cute little T-shirt. She'll be a very
Super
groovy
cute
girl. And I've made a dress by extending the T, if you can hold that for me, extending the T-line or the T-shirt into an A-line. And it's also got little ruched cap sleeves on it. So she's a little Anne of Green Gables as well. So I think that's quite cute. I'm very happy to have made garments out of the spare material. So what have you got there?
I have a gorgeous skirt that I've loved but never been able to wear that much because I can't really find a top that suits it. It's very, very busy, and so you want something to tone it down a little. Yeah. And we found the perfect material for it, which is a royal blue, which goes perfectly with this colour here in the background. We'll be using exactly this pattern with the puffed sleeves as well, since it's just one plain colour. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the top.
I think it's going to be a gorgeous outfit, actually, and you're going to look great in it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Good.
Bye.
Welcome back, Darls.
Well, thank you, darling.
We're now up to our really great interview with Veronik Avery. She is a top-class designer and a really lovely person.
Yeah, and it is really interesting to hear about her being a member of the design team at Brooklyn Tweed.
Yeah.
A little bit of behind the scenes there. So enjoy the interview. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with the next episode. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for spending time with us. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. Today's guest is the Montreal-based knitwear designer Veronik Avery. When I first talked to Veronik just a few days ago, I was immediately struck by how European she felt to me. She has this combination of sophistication and elegance and intelligence with a little mystique about her, and I think those words also describe her designs very well. Veronik describes herself as a knitwear designer by day and a seamstress by night. Her background background is in costume design for the theatre, and her extensive technical knowledge on garment construction has contributed to her reputation as a top-level knitwear designer. Brooklyn Tweed snapped her up to be part of their design team in 2012, so I feel very privileged to have her as a guest on our podcast. Welcome, Veronik. It's lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you, Andrea. It's great to be here.
Let's start off with how you learnt your craft. So the career paths that various highly successful knitwear designers have taken to get to where they are is often varied and interesting. So talk to us about your path, and in particular emphasise the key things or key people who influenced how you learnt your craft.
Well, my path was roundabout. I only learned to knit around the year 2000. But I had been making garments for several years prior to that. I didn't learn either sewing or knitting as a child, but my grandmother was a professional seamstress, and even though she didn't teach me any of her skills, I still envied her ability to make garments. And that stayed with me through my childhood, my teenage years. Once I was in university, I saved up enough money for a sewing machine, so I began to teach myself how to sew. And I quickly became very passionate about it. So much so that a couple of years into my process, I came across an ad for a theater company looking for a costume designer. I didn't know anything about being a costume designer, but I answered the ad, and I showed up at my interview having sketched out every single character in the play. Now, I was hired, whether it was for that reason or because no one else applied, I don't know, but I got the job. So following that, I just continued to get more work in costume design, and through play after play, I eventually met my husband. He and I had our daughter, and because he's an actor and the schedules of an actor and the costume designers are demanding, I had to stop costume design because it was just impossible. The daycare schedule and my schedule just did not correspond at all. At some point, I decided to teach myself how to knit. And again, I went through book after book because I love reading and I love learning everything I can about anything that interests me. So at some point, I decided to try submitting to magazines, and I sent in a few ideas to several magazines. And it was at that point that Melanie Fallick called one day. And she was very encouraging, which was really motivating. Had it not been for her encouragement, I'm not sure that I would have carried on submitting. But I did, and I began working with the magazine she was editor-in-chief for, Intuitive Knits, on a regular basis. Eventually, Melanie left to begin her own imprint at Stuart Tabori & Chang in New York City. And she was, and Pam Allen started working as editor-in-chief for Intuitive Knits. And I continued to be a regular contributor to the magazine. In the meantime, Melanie and I continued working together. She suggested I put together a book proposal. And again, she was very helpful and transparent in answering my questions and giving me her opinions. And that led to my first book with Stuart Tabori & Chang.
So Veronik, in 2009, you started your own yarn company. That was the St. Denis Yarn. And you also had a supporting magazine that was showcasing the yarn with your pattern designs. And you also had short knitting articles on knitting technique and inspirational sources. And St. Denis was producing 3 different yarn types with 36 colours. That sounds like a lot to me. So talk to us about that whole experience.
Well, what led to that began several years earlier. When I was working on the book for Stuart Tabori & Chang, I was hired to be the creative director of a yarn company that no longer exists. That was called Johnson Creative Arts, or GCA for short. And over there, I was responsible for pattern support for about 3 different yarn lines, as well as yarn sourcing and development. And that's where I really learned how to work with mills and representatives and where really their yarn came from. When I left, I began my yarn company, and I called it Saint-Denis after my late mother's surname. And at that time, I felt that yarns were really one or the other thing. They were either very rustic, and while I love that, I realized that many people find that difficult to wear next to their skin. On the other end of the spectrum, many yarns are very soft and delicate, and that carries with it a higher level of having to care for it. And they're just not as durable. It's not a default. That's just how it is. So what I wanted to find was a yarn that was really in the middle of that. So the kind of yarn that you would have seen garments in vintage stores made out of. You have sweaters that from the 50s and the 60s, and they look wonderful. You don't even have to take off any pills. And the stitch quality is really very crisp, and the colors are saturated. And I really love that about them. So I was looking to recreate that while making a yarn that was completely North American. I didn't want it to come from China or Turkey, not even the fiber itself. So the yarn, the Saint-Denis yarn, the Nordique and Boreal were completely North American. And they were even dyed in the USA. Knowing how it worked, I also knew that I had to have parent support for it. And I began publishing a magazine. Because of the situation that I was in, I had to do most things for it. I had to be, the head designer, the photographer, the editor, the graphic designer, working with the printers. And unfortunately, going back a little bit, when I was working on the book and I started working as a creative director for the yarn company, it was a lot of stress, and I became ill. I came down with a chronic illness. And it being chronic, it affected me while running the yarn company, and it just became too much. So at some point, I had to make a decision whether or not to continue. And what helped was that I had been talking to Jared Flood, who's a good friend. And once he was sure that he wasn't going to influence me one way or the other, he told me that anytime I wanted to join his team, he would be happy to have me. So that really helped make the transition from the company closing down.
Okay, that's very interesting, because it takes a lot of courage to build up a business, and it takes a lot of hours.
Yes.
Sometimes you can be working 7 days a week, and you put your whole emotion and soul and everything into it just to get it going. And it's very courageous to be a business owner, isn't it? Because you don't see immediate results for a long time. You have to really live in uncertainty. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and for all different reasons. Sometimes the timing, and sometimes for mistakes people do, or in your case, having an illness. Mm-hmm. So that's it's interesting. It's a big challenge for you. So thanks for sharing that. That's I can imagine would be a difficult thing. Yeah, but it was great that you were able, that Jared saw your talent and could sort of whip you into his team, yes. So to speak. So let's talk now about your typical designing process. There probably isn't a typical designing process, but you're part of the design team for Brooklyn Tweed. So maybe you could start off by saying, how does it work for the design team at Brooklyn Tweed? How do they go about getting there and planning their collections? And then tell us a little bit about what you do when you're designing and how you work.
Well, they're very organized over at Brooklyn Tweed. We get mood boards about 3 months prior to our annual design retreat. Our design retreat takes place in Portland, And we get together for 3 days, and we plan the following year's collection. So when we arrive, we've had our mood boards. We arrive with our sketches, our swatches, and we first present our designs to one another. We talk about our inspiration, we talk about the construction, what kind of details we imagine. And Jared also insists that we emphasize how excited we are about a particular design, because that really, the intent really comes through in a knitwear design, like how much you want to wear this thing that you're making. And through it all, we give each other feedback. We might get particularly excited about one of our colleagues' designs and, excitedly encourage them to make it. So we do that until we've pared it down to what we think is a good collection. At that point, we have to be practical and think in terms of how will they work together, how will they be photographed, what kind of colors are they going to use. We don't want to ever oversimplify design, but we have to make sure that the collection is cohesive and that there is something for everyone. It's, for whether it's a beginning knitter or an advanced knitter. Although even for beginning knitter, we don't really believe that there's anything that a person can't do if they really want to make it.
So you don't dumb down patterns, is what you're saying?
No, when I worked at the other yarn company, there was always an emphasis on you must make the easy, the fast to knit. That's what people buy. People don't buy the advanced designs. That doesn't happen at Brooklyn Tweed. We never said that's too complicated, no one will make it. If you want to make it, if we all think it's a good design, go for it.
That's what I love. And what happens if one of the design team has a design almost completely perfect, but just doesn't quite like the sleeves or doesn't quite like the opening? Do you sort of have a collaborative effort together?
Definitely. We'll discuss but what kind of techniques can be used, and maybe that little tweak that's going to take it to the next level. It's never undoing someone's work. It's always encouraging our colleagues' work, making it the best it can be.
That's great. And what about you? So when you've decided what designs are on your workbench that you have to come up with, how do you go about it? The grading and the writing out. Do you have certain techniques that you use?
Yes, and those have been developed over the years. I begin by charting out the full garment, much in the way a Japanese pattern is presented. Because of logistics, I can't knit every sample. So at least that way, I virtually knit it. I know exactly where the decrease is going to fall, how close to the cable it will be, how the neckline will work out. And that way, if there's anything I'm unsure about, I can just swatch that small piece of the garment in order to make sure that I'm very happy with it. And then I can confidently hand it off to a sample knitter and know what the sample will look like in the end. Once that's done, the grading is also a convoluted system of my own doing. Back when I began, I worked with a calculator and I would write down my notes and I'd make my calculation, and I quickly came to my senses and started using spreadsheets and formulas. Doing so meant that I always had a record of where a number came from. So if there was a mistake, I could fairly easily go back and figure out where the error had come in. Following that, the grading system was born out of the spreadsheet use. I was familiar with grading patterns, and I knew how it worked, how each garment piece was subdivided in order to either increase the size or decrease the size. So I began making up my own formulas so that it would generate numbers as a basis. It's not a final number. It's a bit like looking at a sheet of code, because I have 6 to 8 sizes on one document. And I look at them and I can see, okay, this needs to be nudged and that needs to be adjusted. And I can add a formula about, well, where is that repeat going to land for this particular size, in order to ensure that every size has the same proportional design elements. You don't want to have a cable that's this wide on your small size remain the size on 4 sizes up.
Yes.
It throws off the proportion altogether. So having these numbers all in one place means that I have a map of each size in front of me.
That sounds very interesting. I'm just picturing it. And you have your chart, and when you're going back to your charts, basically what you're saying is almost every stitch of the pattern can be charted, and that way you can look at it like a finished garment and really check, is it written correctly? Okay, so let's talk about your design aesthetic. In the introduction to this interview, I said a few words about how I think your design aesthetic is. So tell us, how is your design aesthetic? What do you aim for? And also, what are your main strengths in designing?
It's hard to describe what my style is, because I'm probably too close to it in order to really define it properly. It's definitely rooted in classic clothing and history of fashion, but I don't want it to come across as costume pieces. I like to think that I'm dressing the person as opposed to creating fashion. And I think that's the costume designer's point of view. When you're designing for the theater, you have to keep in mind the play, the actor, the character, and everything else. It has to work together to support the person wearing the garment. It sends out a message to the audience as soon as the actor comes on stage. Similarly, when we go through life, we are sending a message through what we are wearing. And of course, what a person chooses to wear is also, it can be very emotional, it can be aspirational. So I try to give a person that, give them a garment that supports them.
Okay, so when you're designing a design, you might have adjectives in your mind like confidence or sensuality or flippancy, things like that. Is that what you mean in a way?
Yes, but I'm very visual, so it's not.
It's not wordy,
not
but
words.
Yes.
No, it's really about the feeling, and
yeah.
I take my sketchbook and I just try and I play with things, and it comes to me as I draw it out.
Because you started off in fine art, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So based on your years of working in the industry and having to come up with top quality designs efficiently and quickly, what would be your best advice to up and coming designers? What do you think they need to know?
I do think that we've lost something. We've gained and we've lost by having this access to the internet. I don't see people picking up books as I did when I began. And I still feel the information in the book is much more comprehensive than anything you'll find on the internet. So the first thing I would recommend is to study pattern making. Really learn how the pieces work and what achieves different effects. How do you create volume? How do you fit? For knitwear designers, that's achieved through flat pattern making. Draping is a possibility, but that's not usually done for knitwear design. I would also recommend studying custom fitting. It's not absolutely necessary because we're writing standard sizes, but I feel that seeing the diagrams in a custom fitting book really brings home what needs to happen in a particular pattern piece to fit the body. And I think it's very, very useful information to have in one's arsenal.
And that's pretty evident in your reputation, I think. You know, your patterns are very meticulous, and it's, I think as a knitter, it's so nice to be able to rely on that. And often newbie knitters, when they first come to knitting and first come to knitting garments, it's hard for them to know whether the reason why their garment doesn't fit them is their fault or because the design wasn't written in the best way possible. So I think it's fantastic to have patterns that are written that you can totally trust.
But, you know, it can be trusted also because, at least at Brooklyn Tweed, we have such a good system. We have our senior tech editor, who's herself an extremely talented designer, Robin Melanson, and she is the head technical editor. But there are other editors who come and counter edit. There are many on the staff who read through each pattern to make sure that everything works. So it's really it's vetted completely.
Okay, so very soon you're going to show us some of your designs and talk about them, the construction and the techniques involved. But I've just got one last little question before we go there, and that is, you've got an influential position in the hand knitting industry, and you obviously really care a lot about it. So what are some of the challenges that you think the hand knitting industry has, and how would you address them?
Well, the thing about the hand knitting industry is that there's the real positive and negative aspects to it. Now, for instance, there's no barrier for entry, and that can be a really great thing. Like, anyone with an idea can submit, whether it is to a print magazine, an online magazine, a design. And they don't even have to do that. They can simply put their designs out on the internet and, acquire a following. But again, there's no barrier for entry, so who's to say that those patterns are as well written as they can be? So it creates an environment where the knitter may not be completely confident in the patterns that they purchase, and that can be felt across the industry. Also, there are fewer and fewer magazines publishing designs than there were in years past. When I began, there were fewer magazines than there had been 20 years earlier, where women's magazines used to include a knitting pattern in each issue. As time went by, less and less avenues were available for knitwear designers to publish their work. And at the same time, the pay did not change. So what a designer was paid in 1990 was pretty much the same as what a designer was paid in 2005 and now in 2017. So that really hasn't kept up with inflation. And all the while, it still remains the designer's responsibility to produce the sample, to write the pattern, to grade the pattern. And for the last part, it can be daunting if someone hasn't studied grading seriously, to know how exactly to go about it. And there isn't a lot of support for that. It's really on the designer's responsibility to do all of those things. And it's not every designer's wish to grade. So this is a coat made of Brooklyn Tweed shelter yarn, and it has small profile cables on the front and on the back and on the sleeves. It has a bit of texture. Shelter is a very comfortable yarn. It almost feels hand spun. Because it's a coat, I felt it was absolutely necessary to have pockets, and the way the pockets are done, the lining is sewn to the back because it's pretty difficult to have a very even result when you sew patch pockets on the front of a garment.
Okay, lovely. And it's at an angle too, which is nice.
Yes, they're not huge, but there's enough room for your hands. And it's a very comfortable coat. It has a modified drop sleeve, so it does have this, a cap, but it's not flat. the way it's done in pattern making is that you spread the sleeve, and that's what's create a flatter cap. Because I find it's nice on a coat to have, a deeper armhole and the shoulder falling off the bone like this. So this is Fuse. It's another Brooklyn Tweed garment. It was one of the first garments that I did for Brooklyn Tweed after Jared started his company. And I wasn't a design team member at that point. It was a wool people design. I still had my yarn company then. And the idea of this design is it's a modified waterfall. A waterfall garment usually has a piece that goes straight out and comes down. But with this design, I wanted to have the option to make it into almost a built-in scarf. So there are buttons on each end and little loops. So it almost becomes a double-breasted garment with a built-in cowl.
That is so unique and gorgeous. I haven't seen that design before. That is really gorgeous.
Thank you. And I use nice little leather buttons in the back. And you see this sweater is, I think, 6 years old. And it's been worn quite a bit. So you can see that the shelter does well through the years. And I used a very subtle stitch pattern, even though the garment was more about the shape, because as a knitter, I guess that could be a personality defect, but I'm easily bored. So I don't care for too much stockinette. Or even if I do have stockinette, I like to break it up somehow. I find it more interesting to knit. And it's a very small repeat, so it's very easally memorized.
I love that design. I think
Thanks.
It is so elegant.
Thank you. So this is Wake. It's made out of loft from Brooklyn Tweed again. And this shows what I mean about not liking stockinette that's uninterrupted. So there is a lot of stockinette here, but there's also a lot of shaping happening. You have these cables which start off more towards the center, but move in towards the underarm as the sweater progresses. And the side seam follows the cable. It's not a straight side seam. And there's also short rows, because short rows are one of the best things in knitting. That's what creates that little dip from front to back.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. It's called a modified. It's called modified raglan because the line going from underarm to the neckline isn't straight. You can see there's a very subtle curve to it, and that makes it feel a little bit more elegant, a little dressier. And the last thing was the neckline. I really wanted to keep the neckline as clean as possible, but as we all know, if you leave stockinette on its own, it's not very durable. So what actually happens here is that there's a line of chain stitching on the raw edge, and it keeps that edge from stretching out too much. It travels down to the bottom of the neckline, and there's a few crochet stitches there to ensure that doesn't spread apart and make anything unattractive. It just looks naked, but it isn't. And the back is actually faced. It just looks like stockinette, but it's actually a double layer, and it's tacked down. So there is some structure there to prevent it doesn't end up like those beautiful garments that we loved 10 years ago that had raw edges everywhere. But the more you wore them, the more they fell apart.
I love all these little bits of detail that you don't immediately see, but, there's all of these different techniques just waiting to try out. And particularly that modified raglan. I haven't seen that before.
No, it's not common, but it's something that like we do. I mean, I don't read every pattern that's put out by everybody, but I know that, the design team and we like that.
And I've noticed that you've got a theme here happening with grey.
Yes.
Is that your favourite colour?
Yes, grey all day. My cats have been locked out of the room, because they're crazy, but they're both grey. And it's an ongoing joke at the design retreats. Who gets to work with grey?
Oh, okay. What, everybody wants to?
All of us. So this I would consider a simple design, but you can see like what kind of like of luxuries were allowed for the design team. We can use tubular casts on whenever we want. It's encouraged actually. From working for magazines, they often will say that takes too long, that's too complicated, so you have to cut these things out. So this particular garment has stitch patterns, which I found from a Japanese stitch pattern book. I think it's the 1000 book. And I can't remember, the cable is very simple. It could have been from any variety of books. What happens though is the central cable, as it meets the neckline, there's a bit of a cross happening at the base of the neckline. I'm not sure if you can see that, okay?
Okay, yes.
And that's followed by an I-cord all around the neck. Again, sometimes it's nice to have a rib. Sometimes you want something more subtle to finish off edges. So this particular one, it's more of an everyday garment, but I still feel like it's a very comfortable garment.
Again, it's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Personally, for me, it's great to hear about this because I'm really wanting to add, these on my list. What I'm particularly attracted to is all the little bits of detail, that just make it extra classy or extra professional, the finish.
Well, that's always what's fascinated me about sewing and knitting, because really you can take the time to make these things beautiful. And perhaps it's something that only the wearer can appreciate, but it's there. It's that little secret.
Yeah.
But the shirt I'm making here is a friend of mine's design. Of course, I had to make my own little changes. I'm obsessing over how to continue the pattern from the main shirting fabric to the placket.
Okay. Yes.
So little changes like that, because this fabric has absolutely no repeat, so you can't match anything.
Yeah. But that is quite fun. You can get quite addicted to that, can't you?
It's really fun. I really like it. This is burr. It's also made out of shelter. And I wanted something that felt a little tailored. And I did want the smooth fabric of stockinette for this particular garment. But I did insert some interest. For instance, the rib at the side continues a little bit, while this piece goes and meets the side seam. And there's a similar detail on the sleeve. And the collar, it's surprising how big you have to make a knitted collar in order for it to look in proportion once worn. But yes, the collar is in garter ridges in the back, and it's connected to a rib lapel.
Okay.
And you have these little details happening in the back.
Well, thank you so much, Veronik. It's been so wonderful, particularly to look at your garments and to hear you talk about them, because I'm re-inspired to knit a lot more of them. So thank you so much for spending time on our podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure as well.
Okay, we'll say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Goodbye.